Hi Gav, how are you?
Oh, not too bad, thanks, mate. You?
Yeah, good, thank you for agreeing to come on the show. It's a pleasure to have you.
No, thanks for having me. Thanks for having me, genuinely.
First of all, for anyone that might be listening to this that doesn't know you yet,
Yep.
just give people a quick background about yourself.
So, I'm two people in one, really. Everything about me is buy one, get one free, I suppose. I'm Gav Skevington in daylight. I'm Tobey Alexander in my other life. I've kind of lived that dual life. I'm working blue light services in my day job, but in my spare time, I'm Tobey Alexander. So I'm an author, a screenwriter, and general creator, and a bit of a rebel in that sense. But it's only been over the last few years that those two personalities have become one, really. I always set them out as two separate, distinct people. But it was probably the last couple of years, I thought the best thing I can do is bring them together, because I've got people who are impacted not only by the books I write, but the things I talk about from both sides of my life. So rather than be confusing and have two lives, it's kind of Gav Skevington by day, Tobey Alexander by night. It's almost like Batman.
Man, I guess.
Just less interesting and less rich.
Just without the bats as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because obviously now I've noticed on your social media content, you're disclosing that now
Yes.
as well.
It's been a really weird journey to get to this point, I'll be totally honest. So if I could sing, I would have like the perfect X Factor backstory and some of the things that me and my family have been through over the years that kind of led me to here. But I think if I sum it up around why you've asked me on here really more than anything else. So at the age of 36, I finally admitted that I was neurodivergent. I have always known. I have known since as far back as I can remember that there was something different about me. And it was when I was doing my university degree that we did a big section on social psychology, and we did the AQ50, so the autism quotient test. We did the AQ50 and I scored significantly on that. But at the time, I was trying to apply for jobs and in a world that didn't really accept it. And there was no way that if I continued along the line towards the blue light services I wanted to work in, that I could like explore that. So I bottled it away, and I bottled it away for a hell of a long time. And it wasn't until we had children and my middle son needed his own diagnosis that I kind of owned it a little bit. We went through quite a bit that brought it all to the forefront. And I decided that rather than hide who I am, I was literally going to stand in front. And I did. I stood in front of a mirror and I said, I'm Gav Skevington, I've got autism. And it was really weird feeling because I had hidden it all that time and I'd never wanted to say it out loud through shame, through fear, through embarrassment. And it was kind of this weird, liberating experience. So I literally went from, so it was 2019, I went from just coasting along, wearing a mask every day, pretending to be someone else, to saying, I'm going to embrace who I am. And now you fast forward to 2025, and I do talks around the country, and I've written a book about my journey. It's kind of like flipped everything over. So I think that's probably a good bit of context as to why you've invited me here, apart from selling books.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny that you should. I guess we start with that because, well, I've got a copy of your latest book here. I got, and the first kind of pillar of that is talks about self acceptance, and obviously talk about your own experiences in learning, like you say, to not only disclose about your neurodivergence but accepting it within yourself as well. And it's really, I think it's something that a lot of people struggle with probably initially, but I think also even before diagnosis as well, that feeling of you're different is something that can be hard to accept because you don't know why you're different. So how for you, in terms of obviously your diagnosis, which I know when we spoke before, you kind of said you got your bug off
Yeah.
offer with it, buy one get one free.
Yeah.
With you not only got the autism, but you got ADHD as well
Yeah.
alongside it. How did that diagnosis help with that self-acceptance on your part?
So for me, it's like I say, when I said that I knew, I did, and I'd hidden it. When I looked in the mirror and said I'd got autism, I kind of settled myself on everything. People will relate to the fact that it becomes an obsession. I need to know everything about it. I need to understand why and break it all down. And the big part for me was I suffer really bad from imposter syndrome and self-doubt. And I've always done that. And I think that comes about because I spent so long hiding who I was. So I always felt the fraud on the inside of people are going to find me out, people are going to know that I'm different, so I've got to work really hard. And that kind of sowed that seed of doubt. So when I eventually said it out loud, I needed to understand it, but I would still go with the caveats. I'd do my initial talks and I'd say, I've got autism, or I think I've got autism, but it's not confirmed yet, so I could be wrong. And I think that was a really big thing. So when I wrote the book, I wanted it not to be just for people who are diagnosed. I wanted it to be for people who were on that journey, whether it's self-diagnosis, whether it's going through the diagnosis process, or just identifying and not wanting to take it through a clinical route. Because I know what each of those phases feels like as you kind of try and find yourself. And it sounds dead spiritual in that sense of like, I need to find out who I am on the core and all those sorts of things. But when I sat down to write NeuroEdge, so it took me, when I write normally my fiction, it's one copy is the living truth and my edits are only ever grammar. NeuroEdge was different because it was so personal. I needed to get it really, really right. And I wrote it, it took me 2 years. And last year, probably last Christmas, I'll be dead open, it was probably one of the closest times that I was to breaking. So I'd got my diagnosis in. There were loads of stresses going on. And the version before the one that I ended up committing to became a rant. It became me kind of finger pointing at the world, saying, oh, you were wrong, and this was bad, and this was bad, and this, and this, and this. And it lost its way. And I sat down with one of my friends who's got ADHD as well. And I said, where am I going wrong? And she said to me, she went, you aren't writing for them anymore, you're writing for you. And that hit me. I'm like, yeah, that's the point. I do my talks for me so I can share my story, but writing the book, I wanted it to be focused on other people. So I sat back and over Christmas, just gone, I rewrote the whole thing from start to finish. And that's where I forced myself to say, how can I break down, not literally, my journey to this point? And that's where the 6 pillars came in. And that's why I put self-acceptance as the first one. Because everything else around creativity, the masking, the focus, you can't get there without accepting yourself, because you will always find the blocker. Because no matter how hard you push and you try, you will always have that little voice, like I said, that goes, but maybe not. Maybe I'm a fraud. Maybe I'm not quite there. Maybe I'm not right. And that's why I focus so much on self-acceptance being that first one, because it's not easy, especially, and sorry, I'm going to reveal your age, growing up in the 80s and 90s, it was a time when being different wasn't great. You had to fit a mold. You had to fit that nice, perfect kind of position, whether it's everything was extreme. As I was growing up, autism wasn't a spectrum. It was you were either normal or not. And there was no in between. And I think that's where the current generation, I'm so envious, because growing up now, well, I dream about the things I could have achieved if I'd been able to be myself sooner. If that makes sense.
And no, I completely agree with that as well, because the younger generation now, there's a lot of differences that seem to be a lot more accepted, certainly with younger generation than back in your day, same age. But no, it very much was like that, and it is something that a lot of people will relate to about when they, from their experiences with maybe speaking with older generations. I think awareness as well of things as well, because there was no awareness back then, I suppose, either.
No, there wasn't.
Or not really a in depth as there is now.
No,
like you say, about that scale of autism, just people wasn't aware of what that was.
And I think the stereotypes were really, really, they were extreme. You think back, so one of my hyper-focuses that I talk about in the book is films. I grew up on films, and I'm obsessed with them in that sense. But I remember growing up, and you think of all the films like Mercury Rising with Bruce Willis, about it's the mathematical genius, that's autism. Well, I'm not great at maths. In fact, I find it really dull. But my oldest son, he's amazing. He can recite his GCSE question that he thought he got wrong. It's so individual, and I think growing up, we had that media exposure that was kind of really, really one extreme to the other, and you could never relate to it, or if you did, and you felt, I kind of understand that. So I remember reading Red Dragon, so the precursor to Silence of the Lambs, and the character Will Graham has what used to be called Asperger's. And I remember reading it and thinking, get how he sees the world so visually. I get how he can picture things so vividly in his brain, because that's what I did. But then I'm thinking, oh, well, that relates to serial killers, and I don't want to do that, and I don't want to be associated with that, and that's all we had. The basis that we had to base that on was like the scary extremes where you didn't feel that that was you. And now I look at my own children who are going through their own journeys, and you're like, they are so much freer to be themselves, and I really envy that. Be that, as we say, whether that's race, gender identity, sexuality, it's like the world predominantly kind of says, be who you are more. And I love that.
Self-acceptance is a really big part, and it certainly sounds that since you've been able to accept yourself and not only understand your neurodivergence, but being able to accept it and live with it, and especially when it comes to disclosing it to other people as well. I know in that chapter, there's a moment that which I resonated with quite a bit when I first maybe told my employer or previous employer that that I had ADHD or have it, not had. Where it says that you build this moment in my head as a catastrophic event, and it's very easy to do, isn't it? And it's a big part, like you say, about the imposter syndrome and everything that comes into it like that. I suppose rejection sensitivity also plays a part in it, which is a well-known trait of ADHD, is blowing something up out of proportion, believing that we struggle to accept ourselves, so how is anyone else going to accept us?
Yes. And that's the big thing, isn't it? It's like you go into it projecting your own fears, I think, onto the person that you're talking to. And I know which bit you're talking about. I remember it. So the area of blue light services that I work in is specialist operations. And I genuinely thought that the moment that I made any disclosure around autism, ADHD, that was the end of it. I had built it up with that expectation of, we have cards basically called tickets. I expected them to take my ticket and snap it in half, and that was the end of it. And they didn't. But I had spent probably a good week having those mental conversations with somebody else, not even honouring them enough to have the conversation. I was like, right, if they say this, I'll go this route. They're going to say this. And I probably went in really defensive. So when I did disclose it, and I was on the verge of tears, I literally had my card in my hand. It's like, I suppose you're going to want this. And the answer was pretty much, why? It just explains why you are good at what you do. And I was like, honestly, that was a proper like, eh? Of all the things I'd planned in my head, that option was never there. Because like you say, the rejection sensitivity and that catastrophizing that we do by nature feeds off that. Back then, I was only just starting to accept myself. I could now walk into a room and have walked into many rooms and disclosed it dead early. I did it in a job interview. Well, it was an internal promotion interview. And I literally walked in the room. We had to do something about inclusive leadership. It was brilliant. It was ballsy, but we had to come up with a presentation for 10 minutes on inclusive leadership. And I literally walked in with a whiteboard in big red writing that said, I am a liar. And the boss had sat there and went, what does that mean? It's like, that's a hook. We'll get there in a minute. But for now, I just want to talk through a couple of bits. And when I got to liar, I says, I'm a liar. And that's because of you. Because of the culture that I've grown up in, being unable to be myself. And the difference is now, I own it, and I'm comfortable with it. So this is who I am, and then moved on. But I was like, the hands were shaking at that moment. Even though I knew that I was right, it was always that, oh, how's it going to land? But yeah, when I made that first disclosure, it didn't go any way I thought it was going to.
And I think a lot of people will, I know like with me, I had a similar experience of that. I thought people were going to question it. Are you sure? Because really question about it and just be really cynical of no, I don't think you're right kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or like you say, that worst fear that you had about, okay, well, you're no longer welcome here, essentially. And I think a lot of people have those experiences.
Yes.
And what I found really interesting in that part as well, I mean, you do it throughout your book, but you set activities which can help talk somebody through that, and so they can plan for that better, and rather than running over the conversations that we probably did in our heads thinking of worst case scenarios, just to give people a little insight into the steps that somebody can take if they are thinking of disclosing it to whether it's their employer, their family as well, which can sometimes be feel like a big task as well, especially when
Yeah.
you're speaking to the older
The
generation.
older generation, yeah. That in itself could be. I think the thing that it's it's difficult not to go down the line of mental rehearsal, because that has its uses, but for me, it's being comfortable with what you're saying. So one of the things I encourage people to do is write it down. Have a notebook, have a piece of paper that you can write down those key points that you want to get across, because it's really easy to get lost in the conversation. And I've done that loads of times. I did it with my initial disclosure to my doctor asking for the NHS diagnosis. I wrote a really long report because that's how I needed to express it. There'll be ways that will work for the individual that kind of just helps cope with those conversations. And there will always be questions that you get asked that you can't prepare for. But if you've got literally a couple of bullet points of explanations, the one common thing is, like you said earlier, are you sure? It's the most common and vicariously the most insulting question you can ever get asked, because yes, I'm certain. That's why I'm telling you. That's why I'm here. But when you break it down, that's just a natural reaction for somebody who doesn't know what to say. Well, are you sure? What makes you think that? And that's where having literally a bullet point list of 2 or 3 things can just help go, right, well, you might not know that when I was a kid, I always used to struggle with X, Y, and Z. Or you might not have seen it, but remember those times when I'd just go and sit in my room for 20 minutes? Well, that was actually me trying to find a little bit of regulation. Or the amount of time when I wouldn't want to go and play with the other kids was because my brain was firing at 1,000 miles an hour and I couldn't concentrate on the games they wanted to play because I was already doing something else. And it's having that there so you don't feel caught off guard. And it's, as I say, it's lowering that defense feeling. It isn't an attack, it isn't anything nasty, but there will be a lot of questions. And the more that you can feel ready for it, I think, is kind of like the big cheat sheet, I suppose, is probably the best way I can put it. And that's all I ever say to people is make that situation as comfortable as you can for yourself. So one thing I always say to people when they come forward, because I get quite a lot of messages through LinkedIn and social media as I openly talk about things, it's you set the meeting place. You set the place that you want to make that disclosure. I had to do it at work. I had to do it in an office. I get that. But for my family, it was I'll invite them to my house rather than go to my childhood home where I would feel a little bit defensive and think, oh, here are the memories, because it will trigger memories. So for me, it's create that environment, even if it's a coffee shop, if that works for you, just in the corner, so not every little old lady and man's listening to your conversation. But make that environment fit for you, for your comfort levels, because in the end, you've got to feel open enough to say and answer some of the questions. And if there are uncomfortable questions you don't want to answer, don't answer them. Offer an explanation if I'm not ready to talk about that yet, or phrase it whichever way works, but don't feel pressured to disclose any more than you have to.
Yeah, and it's a really important point, I think, that you say about an environment that you're comfortable with, because it just helps with those thoughts of, expecting those questions and feeling that you're on the back foot, I suppose, as soon as you start to disclose it, which you don't want to feel like, because you don't want to feel like you're under any kind of pressure or scrutiny when you're trying to put this across.
No, not at all. And that's where the exercises came in. So that's where I say the focus of NeuroEdge was always about the reader and the other person. All I want to be, I am no guru, I'm no knowledgeable person. I just have my journey that I've been through. But what I didn't have growing up was someone I could look to the left or right and say, are you with me? Do you know where I'm going with this? I never had that feeling that I had someone on my shoulder who could say, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Keep going. And that's what I wanted the book to be. So I've done the talks in the past, and I love the talks because, obviously, as you've gathered, I don't shut up. But I enjoy that. But people walk away from a talk and they'll remember it for a week. In 6 months' time, that journey for them is still ongoing. Whereas the book is pretty much, I want to be the friend on the shoulder that just says, you're not alone. Your journey might be different than mine. It's like my mentor, when I was first in my job, said, this job is like a train sidings where you've got 15, 20 different railway tracks and they're all going in different directions and you're expected to manage all of them. That's the journey of neurodivergence. Everybody is slightly different on their position with their spectrum, with their diagnosis, and will experience it differently. But knowing there's another train somewhere close by that's done a similar track kind of breaks down that feeling of isolation. And that's all I did with it. So that's why there's exercises all the way through it, because it's like, it's great for me to talk about my story because I'm selfish in that sense. But they were only ever there to say, you might relate. It's not an autobiography. It's just me sharing key moments to say, now you look at it. Now you look at your version, your moment. It might be completely different than mine. It might be similar. That's why with creativity, being an author, I wanted to talk about writing. I genuinely just want to say, yeah, everyone should write a book. There's a book inside everyone. It wasn't about that. It was about the actual art of creating. If I look at my kids, my oldest, he creates with maths. My daughter, well, the dining room's full of craft and stuff at the moment. I can't actually walk without standing on a safety pin. But that's her creativity. My youngest son dances. I write books. My wife does art. That's all creativity. And it's finding what works as an outlet to kind of, I don't know, release things, help, kind of showcase. And that's the big thing, showcasing what we offer that people don't always see. And especially, like you say, the older generations that will just see the negatives or potentially just see the negatives. It's about, you know what? I can make something from this. I have this in me and now you can see it.
You do talk about it in the book. The key moment for you, like what changed in terms of wanting to disclose this to people?
Oh, you'll get me emotional in a minute. That's all right. It was, like I say, X Factor life. I'll give you the kind of short version. So when my oldest son was 7, we climbed Snowdon, and he conquered it like a champion. It was brilliant. It was raining like Wano. It's Wales. When does it not rain? We got to the top. Like, the train arrived at the same time that we did, and they saw that he'd walked all the way up, and the old people on the train were clapping him. It was like the most emotional thing I've ever experienced. We came back down, and I think it was 6 weeks later, my wife phoned me whilst I was at work and said that he had a rash on his legs. So we thought it was meningitis. So a friend of mine at school died of meningitis when I was 16. So I immediately went into panic mode, did the tumbler test, rash was still there. Got home, got him in the car, got him to the hospital, at which point he couldn't walk. So I literally had to carry, and it sounds melodramatic when I say it, but I was literally carrying what I thought was my dying son in my arms to get him into the hospital. He was put in isolation. It turned out not to be meningitis. It was something called HSP. And that was the trigger that changed everything in life. And we didn't realise it, because fast forward through his recovery, he had to have lots of tests. And one of those was a genetics test. And as part of that genetics test, it turns out that he carries a very rare genetic deletion that links to something called Timothy syndrome. When we did the family test, cue dad guilt, great. It turns out that I have that gene and I've given it to all 3 of my children. And because of that, I made contact with Cardiff University, who were doing tests on this very specific gene at the time. So me and my oldest son went there, did a load of tests, and that linked to neurodivergence, specifically autism and developmental stuff. So the gene that we've got is called CACNA1C. So it's only missing on one side. So we've got one functioning side, one broken side. So we are what's called atypical. So the good side looks after us, but there are links to heart defects, growth issues, all other elements, which we didn't show. So it identified part way through these tests that I scored significantly for the autism stuff. And I was like, yeah, I don't need to do anything with it. It just confirmed what I already knew, but I didn't need to do anything. And it was my youngest son, so my middle child, watching him at school, he was very similar to how I was growing up, in the fact that he was popular, yet not popular, left on the outside, very rarely invited to birthday parties, and kept a bit of a distance. And I could see so many things in him as he was growing up that I related to. So we made the recommendation or the request through school that we could put him forward for a diagnosis. And it was the most god-awful experience. We fill in all the paperwork, and all we got back was reads at expected level, writes at expected level, will be fine. And then I went in to challenge it at school, and one of the teachers said, "Is the ginger one right? I always get him confused with another one." And I'm like, but that's because he's hiding. That's because he's grey at school, because he doesn't want to stand out. And it wasn't until one of his teachers saw him at a gymnastics event and he had a meltdown midway through because he couldn't do something. He had a proper ASD meltdown. And they went, never seen him like that before. That's all the things we say you don't see that we do at home. So I contacted the NHS diagnosis process and says, well, there's no family history, so there's nothing that stands out, so we don't need to. So I was talking to him, and kids have this way of, without physically doing it, sucker punching you in the gut. They blackmail you. I'll never let him know. He's downstairs. He'll listen to me. But he looked at me and he said, because I said to him, I know what you're going through and I experience the same thing. And he says, well, Daddy, you made it this far. How did you do it? And I couldn't answer, because my only answer was, because I lied and I pretended to be someone else my whole life. And that hit me. And I kind of at that moment made a little vow to myself that I wasn't going to lie anymore. I wasn't going to hide it, because I needed my boy to look at me and want to be like me for the right reasons. He wanted to be like me because I looked successful. He didn't know all the battles in my head and all those sorts of things. So it was him that I went, you know what? If it gets my boy what he needs, then put me forward for a diagnosis. I'll go through the NHS. I'll do what I need to do. And that's where I say I worried about the job. And I did, probably for a split second. And I feel bad for it. But being told that I'd scored on the tests at Cardiff, I thought, do I need to disclose? Well, if I don't, I'm 100% going to keep my role. If I do, there's a 50-50 chance I might not. But if I don't, there's a 100% chance that I won't be able to show my son the right way to do things. So that's what spurred me on to do it. And I thank him for it every day. I don't think he thanks me half the time, because he comes over and goes, yes, I know what he's talking. But yeah, it was him. And it was his need for me to be a role model. And I always say to put my big boy pants on and own it. And I literally went overnight from quiet in denial to what everybody knows now as a little bit gobby, very passionate, and writes books like he knows what he's talking about.
Just those words from your son was just such a pivotal moment for you in your life to be able to really open up and talk about it. And I think it's a really powerful message as well that you wanted to for your son as well, so that you lead by example then and show him the best way to lead his life as well.
Yeah, and I always consider my children will be my upgrade version of me. That's all I think is the next generation should always be the better version of the one before. And I look at him and he inspires me every day. All three of them do in their own way. They all inspire me, because I just think they are so confident and comfortable being themselves. And I mean, my daughter at the minute she's just starting comp this year, and she's in her goth phase, is what I'll describe it as. Rather envious, because I wish that I'd been able to be a goth growing up. But she literally turned up to her school disco or leaving party last week, almost looking like the twin of Wednesday Addams, and stole the show. She's been dead quiet all the way through, just kind of, again, very much like my middle boy, a little bit on the outcast. She stole everything. She stood up there, took the microphone and sang on a stage, and I was like, we don't even hear you sing in the house. It was amazing, and it was because she is so more comfortable being herself. She still has the struggles sometimes where bullying happens and things like that, but she actually carries herself in a way that, God, if I was 11 and doing that, I'd be like, the world would have been like my oyster at that point. What could I have achieved?
It leads into your second pillar that you wrote about, in a way, in terms of masking. It'd be interesting to see the difference from with your kids being able to express themselves and be themselves, to your experiences that you talk about in the book, and having to learn to unmask, and the different masks that you've kind of worn through your life. For anyone that doesn't really understand masking, because I did have a comment the other day on a TikTok post that I did about masking. Well, it was about labelling ADHD and things like that, but the person that wrote the comment did a video about masking, saying that people that are masking are essentially just lying about who they are, and they're not, or being their authentic selves by taking that mask off. You're telling your partner you've lied to them all this time. So to put stigma to bed like that, which is completely far from the truth as we know, just give a brief description about what masking really is and what it looks like.
Masking, as I explain it, it's a survival tool. It's you grow up in worlds and situations where deep down you know you're different. We grew up in 90s and noughties where you needed to fit in. So masking isn't a neurodivergent trait. Everybody does it. It is human nature to mask. I defy anybody who will come forward and say they've never masked in their lives. I've never met anybody yet. What I find myself doing, and I know when I speak to other neurodivergents, is we over-rely on them. And again, it comes to that self-acceptance and that self-doubt because we want to fit in. We don't want to stand out for the wrong reasons because we've been trained and ingrained over the years to kind of be quiet and fit in, don't rock the boat, all those horrible cliches that people say. And masking in itself can have its benefits. But what I find is it's really important to know who owns the masks. And for me, I talk about it quite a lot. For so long, the masks owned me. So there would be a version of Gav. I remember, again, picking a film when I started my job, so 20 years ago. I didn't know what to expect. So I watched films about the area of business and decided that I would be like a Hollywood version of what they thought. Needless to say, that got nipped in the bud very quickly because cockiness and overconfidence aren't great in probationists. But a mask in itself is a way to kind of filter how you feel. But it's really important, like I say, not to unmask completely because there will always be that requirement for a little bit of a mask, but it's knowing that it's you that owns it and not it owning you. And I've got a million masks. I still am taking them off one at a time to find what works for me because I've done it for so long. And it's about, I don't know, it's a difficult one because everyone sees masking different. I massively disagree the fact that it's not about lying. It's not about lying at all. And that's offensive in the sense it can't be just whittled down to something so tiny as that. What it is survival. And it's, my wife knows that I mask. She also knows by the conversations that we've had over the years how to prod me when she knows I'm doing it. So we can have those awkward conversations. And one of them was when she was having chemotherapy. So in 2019, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And my work mask went on. Work me can deal with trauma, stress, critical decision making under collapsing timeframes and pressure. Great. It's the world that I can thrive in because I have the stoic mask that sits there and goes, information intelligence is coming in and I can deal with it. I can make my decisions that are all rational without emotion. So I masked in that first care plan meeting with the doctors in the work mode. And I literally, we have decision sheets in the day job. It's called the NDM, so the National Decision Model. And we have a one sheet where we write it all down and it allows us to make rational decisions. I pulled out one of those. Pertinent piece of advice, if your wife's going through a breast cancer diagnosis, do not pull out a worksheet that kind of boxes her into a simple decision because she does the side-eye thing and looks very mad.
Yeah, I was going to say, what was her reaction to that?
I think it was this look, which doesn't come out very often, but it sparked that really awkward conversation. So she knew, she literally called me out on it. She's like, you're masking. You are hiding how you feel. And I need to know you're feeling something because I'm not a job on a piece of paper. And it was like that hard conversation where I had to look at the mask and go, this isn't the right one. This isn't the right way to deal with it. I still need to be strong, the protector, the one who listens to everything from the doctor and all that sort of thing. So we came to a compromise. And as daft as this sounds, I still wrote everything down, but she bought me a notebook. She bought me a notebook that was, I think I've still got it somewhere. It was rainbow coloured because obviously I do rainbows. It was really brightly coloured and it was something that she said to me, I could still make the notes. She says, make the notes, but don't treat me like a job. And that was the importance of having spoken to her about the masking, that she knew when to call it out and to make sure that Gav underneath was still there. And I did it with confidence around book writing. That's why Tobey Alexander, and I say it in a lot of the social media posts I do, I think Tobey Alexander is the closest version of my real self than I am. Because that version of me can write what he wants, can create what he wants without fear or anything. It'll go on social media like appearing really confident. When Gav sits down behind, I'm going, oh, why did I say that? I'll do it about this. I'll do it about this and think, oh, that went great. That went awesome. And then in about an hour's time, I'll go, oh my God, why did I say that? What if someone thinks this? What if someone does that? Catastrophizing again. But no, for me, that masking element is your survival tool, but it's just got to be used in moderation. And that's all the masking pillar and chapter's about. The 2 chapters that cover it are, I give people tools to audit them. There's literally one of my most popular posts is a masks audit, where you go through and you name them all. Literally think of every situation that you've used the mask in and then weigh up, is it beneficial for me or is it holding me back? And then you can kind of clear away that clutter and that reliance, and that helps you. The authentic self is where you feel more comfortable. What a lot of people think is authenticity is, oh, you fit in and you can just be your normal self and that's it. The authenticity, again, has to come from you. How comfortable are you in sharing all of those elements of you? There are parts of my past and my experiences that will stay just within me. They've shaped everything to this point, but just because I rip off the mask of hiding doesn't mean that everything comes out. Sorry, did I answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I think it is really I think one of the things as well, which like you say, it's a survival tool. So it's automatic. So it's not necessarily something that you make a conscious decision of what mask you're wearing. Like you said in that initial care plan meeting with your wife, you probably didn't think that, oh, I'm pulling out a one sheet is the best decision for this. It was almost probably like a defense mechanism in a sense, I guess.
Yeah.
And like you say, being, it was, you saw your role in that moment as being the protector, and as a protector, you went into work mode. And I think that's something that, because we do talk about masking a lot in the neurodiverse space, but I think like you said, it's not just neurodiverse people that mask. I mean, I'm sure plenty of people that haven't got autism, haven't got ADHD, will say they've got a work them and a home them, and that's essentially what it is. It's just that with neurodivergence, if you're neurodiverse, you tend to do it more because you are trying to adapt. You have to adapt, or you feel like you have to adapt anyway, to different social situations, and just to feel comfortable and like you're fitting in.
Yeah, and one funny thing that I reflected on around masking was my social life is non-existent. But in the blue light world, it's a really socially rich environment, and I found that really difficult. And for the first few years, I would do you'd get invited out on a night out with your team and you felt obligated to go. And I would sit there and I would be on edge. I'd be in wherever we went, if it was a bar or whatever. I wouldn't want to drink in front of them because I didn't want to let my guard down. I'd sit in the part of the room that I could observe everybody. I would people watch. I wouldn't enjoy it. And within an hour, I was sweating. I was exhausted from trying to keep up with every conversation. So I didn't stand out or anything like that. And I hated it. So I went through the phase of forcing myself to do it with the mask of, yes, I'm having fun. And then I went through the phase of, I don't want to do it, so I'll lie. And I'll say, yeah, I'll come out. And then always make up an excuse. Or when they ask me, it'd be like, I'm going to fumble, I'm going to say something and pre-book something else. It just became messy. When I finally went, actually, thanks for the invite, but I don't want to. It's not my scene. It's not my thing. I don't enjoy it. People were like, oh, that's fine. That's all right. I remember the job I'm in now as head of specialist operations training, my predecessor was retiring. And 18 months before his retirement date, he took me to one side and said, I'm having a retirement party. I want you to be there. This is where it's going to be. These are the people I'm going to invite. It would mean a lot if you came, and I'm giving you 18 months notice. Pretty much. And I was like, I can live with that. And I did. I built it all up, planned everything. And my wife was going, yeah, we're going to have a hotel room for the night. We'll have a night away from the kids. It's like, yeah. And then the night before, I'm like, I don't want to go. I just do not want to go. She's like, the mask ain't winning this time. You're going. And it was brilliant. Because I'd been so open about it all my team knew what I was going to be like. And I remember we sat in the venue, and I went and sat in the corner, as I always do. And one of my team was already there, and we sat talking for an hour, and the rest of the team turned up and stood on the other side of the room. And they hung around for a bit, and eventually my wife goes, are you going to say hello to him then? And that was it. It was like, yeah, I'll go over. Spoke to him, and they went, oh, thank God you came over to speak to us. Can we come and sit with you now then? But they'd waited. And that would never have happened if I hadn't said in the past, it's not my thing, I feel uncomfortable, this is how it makes me feel. So taking that mask off of making them feel better by forcing myself into the situation suddenly created what was actually the perfect night out. I had a great laugh. It was at times that it suited me. Not that I was the centre of attention, but they knew that coming and jumping and sitting down at the table and being loud and rowdy and I had to warm to that. But that only came about because I was open.
Yeah, and it's really important that obviously, like we talked earlier about starting with that disclosure is really important and can help with that. And so I think the key from that is not only being honest with yourself about what situations you don't like, which you did there, but also being honest with other people as well, and not feeling like you have to say yes to anything, because I think sometimes there's a sense that we have to agree or conform. I think that's probably part of the masking, is that we
People
feel
please.
like we need to agree with that person or people to fit in. So even though it's not to our own benefit, some of the
people
times.
pleasing is so common because again it comes down, and this is where self-acceptance is the first pillar, because it comes down to that. If you don't feel that you are valid, that you are the important one, you're always feeling that you're having to justify and please others so that you don't get found out. So you end up making the decisions that are against you. You prioritize other people over yourself, and that's the downward spiral. And I've been there. I know so many people that have done it. You spend so much time keeping everyone else happy that by the time you look at yourself as this gibbering wreck of no energy, no drive, no passion, no anything, it's like, what did I get out of that? Well, actually, everyone else is happy, but now it takes me 3 days to recover. Now it takes me 2 or 3 days of pretty much staring at a blank wall thinking, I could write now, I could do this now. I'm just shattered. And it's those moments that kind of make you realise, it's those open conversations and knowing your own self-worth and believing in yourself. I think that's a huge thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And because otherwise that can lead to, another thing that you talk about in your book is chaos. Part of that, in that is about overwhelm. And if you're trying to fit in, and it can be quite exhausting when you're trying to fit into certain situations, especially social ones that involve a lot of people, a lot of, sounds, lights, people talking, different conversations, a lot of sensory overload.
I don't enjoy the small social gatherings like that retirement do. But last week I was in the middle of the Pride Parade in Nottingham with my family, like dressed in my most garish outfit that I could get for this year, surrounded by sounds, music and everything else, doing the march through Nottingham city centre. But then when we got to the end, in the last couple of years that we've done it, my family will just give me 10 minutes where I just literally stand and watch. At the end of the parade, there's a big stage with all the drag artists on. It's a brilliant day. And then there's a little market to the side. For the last 2 years, it's been at that venue. They literally just leave me to stand and like people watch for a bit. And I suppose it's like regulate myself. And then they'll come back. It's like, do you want to do something else now? Do you want to go back to the stage? It's like, can I have 5 minutes? Yeah. They'll go shopping, spend all the money, buy expensive donuts this year. Oh my God, I don't even like donuts. But they know, give me a little bit of time and then I'm back into it again. The irony of that is I love that. I thrive on that. It's like thriving standing on the stage doing the talks. It's the build-up or the aftermath. And that's where, like you say, with chaos. So before people think that I like live in chaos, it's an acronym. But one of the next pillars focuses around finding your own model, and that comes from explaining, not excusing. So we've all seen in the media in recent months the excuse of a neurodivergent condition for behaviours, and I know there have been some famous people that have used it as the excuse for what they've done. And I've always said I will never excuse my behaviour because of my diagnosis, but I will explain it. I will explain the cancer response. That is because I didn't know how to feel. My emotions are what I struggle with. So I didn't know how to feel. So I did what I thought was right. I became work me. I did stoic, safe decision maker. It was the wrong setting, but I explained it. And that conversation that I had with my wife found a solution, found the notebook problem. And the amount of things that I picked up in the meetings that she had missed because she was upset, fearful, all those sorts of things. And for me, chaos was my way of explaining to people when I approach a situation that really pushes me to my limit, that massive overstimulation, overwhelm, I go through 5 reactions. They may go through all of them. I might go through 2 of them, but ultimately the S for me is shut down. And that's kind of like, I will withdraw from everything. And that can be in response to one event, and I'll just go in my cellar and sit and do a workout on my own. That's my shutdown. Or it can be, like I say, around Christmas last year, my shutdown was, I broke up from work for 2.5 weeks over Christmas. And to this day, I couldn't actually tell you what my kids' presents were. I couldn't tell you what they opened because I was shut down that much that I woke up in the morning, I did my routine of a workout first thing, I had some breakfast, I did something throughout the day, I did a second workout, and I went to bed. And you get into that cycle, and that's where I'd shut down. And it was in the new year that we went out for dinner, just me and my wife, and she went, "You were awful over Christmas because you were breaking down again. You were going through that." And I discussed chaos with her as my thing, and she just looked at me and she went, "You were S'ing." She does. "You were in the S. And can you get out of it, please?" If only it were that easy. But actually having that conversation and her knowing how I respond helped. What I say to people within that element around chaos is, it's not using my model of chaos. It's finding your own that explains potentially how you might react. It might just be, I get in a bad mood. But having something to nail that down to kind of break it down, really helps. And it's that communication barrier again. The more we can explain and answer those questions that people may ask or may want to ask, just helps.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's very much, you're in that kind of burnout space as well when you're shutting down.
Oh,
and it's very much seems like a process, and obviously burnout's quite a difficult one to sometimes avoid because you don't know it's coming, you can't see it yourself, but like you said about your wife there, she could see it in you. How do you know when you get into that stage, and are you finding it better now that you acknowledge that there is that process that you go through before you get to that shutdown? Have you found it easier to kind of avoid getting to the S?
I still get to the S. It's inevitable, but it's by putting labels on it, by labeling it myself, I can pick up better where I am and put barriers in place. I'm never going to completely avoid a shutdown. It's always going to happen, but it's what I can now do, having vocalized my own model, is limit the impact. If I know that I'm going for a shutdown and the pressure is on, as I say, I can put interventions in, or my family can recommend interventions. So it was like the other day. At the moment, I've got loads going on. I'm trying to obviously market a book, make a film, launch a side business, launch a consulting business. I'm ADHD on steroids, I think. Working out twice a day. I never stop. And it was the other day, was it yesterday? No, it was Friday because I had a long weekend. It was Friday, and I sat there and I wrote 800 words. And literally, as soon as I hit 800, it was a really emotive scene in the book that I'm writing. I zoned out. That was it. Nothing was coming in. My wife's doing, divvied up the chores. She was on the hoovering, and I'm just sat there. It's like, everything's winding me up. Everything's making me frustrated, and I can't do anything. So I was getting more and more frustrated with myself. And we'd said, we will take the dog for a walk after we've done X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, we haven't taken the dog for a walk. And I literally just got up and I said, right, I'm taking the dog on my own. I'm going to listen to some music and I'm going to take the dog on my own. And she was like, yeah, okay, that's fine. And I was gone for an hour. And it was that which I'd still had the shutdown, because the shutdown was me being on my own going out. But because I'd picked up on it, I could do something about it. And I think that was the importance of it, was the fact that for me, a shutdown can be a short thing. It can be the thing over Christmas. It can be, I mean, I shut down during her cancer treatment.
Maybe you're speaking about that in your book, about sitting there and kind of taking those instructions to the letter, in terms of sitting there from what was it, 8 a.m?
Yeah.
You were sat there for waiting until she came out of surgery, and
so that
she didn't do anything in that time.
I'd gone through that heightened anxiety of, so I was in the cognitive overload the day that she was having her surgery, because we'd made it through chemo, we'd made it through all of that treatment element, and the surgery was the last thing. So in reality, it was the safest element, because the cancer had gone, it was just removing the tissue and all that sort of thing. So there was no risk. But my cognitive overload was like massive. My heightened anxiety was, you can't imagine, you probably can't. You then got my overwhelmed senses of where I'm going. I was agitated and irritable, and I was told, we will come and get you when she's out from surgery. There's the waiting room. So my shutdown was very much, okay, I shall go and sit in that room. And I sat in the room. And I think it was something, I think it was like 8 o'clock she was wheeled out to go into surgery, and about 3 or 4 in the afternoon, the first nurse came in and went, what are you doing here? I'm like, 'cause I was told to wait here. She's like, your wife's been out of surgery for 3 hours. I'm like, well, where is she? Oh, she's on a ward. Which one? Because no one, I was told to wait in the room. They were packing up the ward by the time that they realised I was still there, because I hadn't even been to the loo, I'd not eaten anything. My laptop had run out of battery because I hadn't taken a charger, like an idiot. So I was literally sat there like that. But it didn't, for some people that would feel like really weird, and you'd get itchy feet and you'd be like out and asking where. For me, that was the perfect shutdown room. I was alone in that waiting room all that time, and I was just like, I could tell you what the room looked like now, but I couldn't tell you any detail because there was nothing. And then when they came, it was like, why didn't you tell me that she was going to be done then? I got taken to a ward, and she was in a morphine-induced stupor at that point. She still told me off. I've been waiting for you. I'm like, yeah, but I didn't know where you were. Why didn't you go and ask them? They told me to wait. And even under morphine, she did the eyes again. So I told you my life was X Factor, didn't I? I told you I've got like backstories for days.
Yeah, I mean, you've definitely been on an incredible journey. That incredible journey continues as you continue with your books. Obviously, with NeuroEdge. I haven't spoken too much about your Raven series. Obviously, that's pillar 3 in your book as well, is creativity. And I think from what I've read, movies is a really big inspiration for you.
Yeah. Yes.
I know you talk about where the Raven series, or not necessarily all started, because I know like when we spoke last time, you know that was formed in your imagination and from when you was 15. But the point of that you decided to bring that into reality, what was that?
It was The Rock. It was Dwayne The Rock Johnson. Blame him. No, we were in London. It was a bizarre set of circumstances. So I just found out that I'd passed my exam for promotion, which was brilliant. I was in London, and we were walking around, and we ended up at the premiere for Black Adam. Like, huge man crush moment as The Rock is stood like 20 feet in front of you. You're like, it's The Rock. And he stood and talked about, now, lots of people didn't like the film. I loved it. But he spoke about that being one project that he was passionate about, that he always wanted to make, that he had worked really hard to get the part. He wanted to take over Warner Brothers or DC or something with it. And you could see the passion radiate from him. And I was stood there like in awe. And then it was really weird because Pierce Brosnan's in the film. And as I wrote a story about an alternative version of the Grim Reaper. And I started it just before Sarah had chemo. And then I didn't write the sequel until she'd been cured. And I saw Pierce Brosnan there, and I'm like, I always imagined him as my version of the Grim Reaper, as Death. And I'm like, well, I've got a passion project. And it could link to the Death story. And as I looked at her, so all three kids were there doing the jump in to see The Rock. I'm like, get down, he's going to talk to me, not you. And I just looked at her and I went, I'm going to write The Raven. And she was like, well, that came from nowhere. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to write The Raven. I'm going to write it. I'm finally going to do it. And we were on the tube back to the house that we were in an Airbnb. And by the time that we'd got there, because I always carry little notebooks with me, by the time we got back, I'd planned the whole story. It was going to have Jack the Ripper. It was going to have an alternative version of him being a demon. The Grim Reaper was going to be in it. I'm like, yes, I'm on this. I'm going to write this one book. And that was in 2022. And I finished the 8th book, hopefully by the end of next month. It's kind of grown a little bit. But you look at that, and when I say passion project, ravens were an obsession. I've got a tattoo of a raven across my arm. Obviously, my logo is a raven. It was my GCSE mock English literature exam that I wrote the raven as a curious, weird, not a superhero, something a bit different. And my English teacher loved it and said, oh, you're going to have to do something with that one day. And I never did, because whilst the teacher said it was great, the kids in my class were like, weirdo, what are you writing that for? That's just weird. Oh, do you like monsters? You know how teenagers are. So I boxed it away and that was another thing I buried down. I thought, one day I'll do it. One day I'll do it. And when I eventually started writing books and releasing them, it was literally stood at Leicester Square with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson there talking about his passion project. That just, something went, do it now. Normally I'll get an idea, I'll think about it and I'll start it and then never finish it. It was like it all made sense. Being there at that moment in time, seeing that person say that thing, and the raven woke up. And it's the one thing I focus on selling at the moment, aside from NeuroEdge, because it has allowed me to say hello to the 15-year-old version of me, the one that I hid. So all that denial from teenage years to being an adult to now finally expressing myself as I am, I think, you know what, this is me giving you something. This is the 15-year-old me that was the outcast, that was treated different, that was the weirdo in the room, all that sort of stuff. And now, because of that book series, it's opened up doors. It's opened up so much. I've trusted myself to write my own screenplays, and we're looking at filming a short film at the end of this year between me and a director that I've met through social media. So it was kind of me allowing myself to play that dream out, I suppose.
Yeah, and it's a really powerful moment of obviously meeting someone that's your hero, I guess, and being so inspired by them and putting all into their passion project. Unfortunately, they're rewriting DC, aren't they? So
yeah, no.
I don't think he'll get to do a second
No
one.
more Black Adam. I can just watch that one on repeat. I don't know how many times I've watched it, in fairness. But the only other person who has ever influenced me that much would be Arnie. I remember reading his Total Recall, as it was, his autobiography. I think I read it in like 3 days, and it's like that thick. And then he released Be Useful, and it was that, reading that twice, that made me think about committing NeuroEdge to paper. Because I thought, yeah, he's uber famous, he's run a state in America, he's made millions in films, but I'm the everyday guy. I am the bloke from Nottingham who's done a few quirky things, but had a literal roller coaster of a life. And you know what? I have a platform now and a story to tell that I think people will benefit from. And it was reading that and thinking about it, and I thought, you know what? Even if I write this and one person reads it and it connects with one person, that's it. Because ultimately, when all of my kids are old enough, they're all going to get a copy of it, and they can learn more about the dad that they probably don't know. And hopefully feel the same inspiration that I felt standing in front of the rock and reading on his stuff.
Yeah, because your book, NeuroEdge, is definitely not that kind of linear line of just going through life. I mean, obviously there's like relatable experiences that you put in there that to the pillars that align with the pillars, but just everything that you put in there is so emotive, it's raw, but it's a real roller coaster as well. there's so many ups and downs through it, from we said about learning to accept yourself, peeling away those masks. It's just incredible, like the amount of stuff that you've endured, I guess, but you're still managing to find light at the end of the tunnel and finding ways to put negative experiences into turning them into positive ones. So saying about obviously lads HSP and the experiences around that, and you speak about in the book about the promise you made to him about doing Everest and taking a photo there, but you did something even better with that and turned it into something even better, didn't you? Sorry.
Oh, the emotion comes back. Yes. So when he was recovering from HSP, as you say, I made him a promise. So he couldn't walk, as I say. Took him into the hospital, and it was, in fact, the room behind where we're filming now. In his room, and all he could keep down was water. And he was in his bed, and he said, "Daddy, can I walk Snowdon again?" And I'm like, "Mate, the moment you can walk again, I'll take you back." And as you do as a dad, I made a throwaway comment and said, "Well, Snowdon's not the biggest mountain in the world, you know. Everest is bigger." "What's Everest?" So I talked to him all about Everest. We got pictures up, we looked at it on the internet, everything like that. And he says, "Oh, will you get me a photo?" And I'm like, "Yeah." We went on Google. He's like, No, will you get me a photo?" And I was like, yeah, I'll go to Everest and I'll take a photo for you. And I was like, why did I make that? Obviously, hyperfocus kicks in. I had to learn everything about doing the Everest Base Camp trek and all those sorts of things. And I had planned to do it, but the person that I was going to go with ended up going bankrupt. So we didn't do it. I started looking again, and cancer arrived at home. And it was when my wife was given the all clear that everything was sorted. She said, "You need to go to Everest now because life is too short. You've always wanted to go, so go." And I was like, "Yes, I've got permission. I've got the permission slip. I can go." And she looked at me and she went, "But why don't you ask if he wants to go as well?" And my oldest lad, he'd recovered at this point. He was back into his walking. He was building his fitness up. And I was like, that's an idea. So I asked him, and at that point, he wasn't your normal 11-year-old or 10-year-old. He went, "Can I think about it? I want to watch some videos on YouTube first." And he literally went on YouTube and watched, because the airport that you land at when you do Everest Base Camp is I think it's labelled the world's most dangerous airport. Something like a 158-metre runway on the side of a mountain that makes the opening scene to Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom look like a pleasure cruise. It's terrifying. And he watched these videos, and after a couple of days, he went, "Yes, I'd like to go." And I was like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. So 2 of us, obviously, me at that point thinking, right, I've never actually travelled, and I'm now taking just me and my boy. So I invited my dad, because my dad was best friends with the son of Dougie Scott, who's the first British man to climb Mount Everest. And my dad was actually at Dougie's house when he summited. So I was like, well, that's an unfinished journey for you. So we went as 3 generations. COVID arrived, so it postponed us. My boy was going to be 12 when he went originally. With COVID, he ended up being 13. But in 2022, I was very proud to break the promise. So I never got him a photo of Everest. But I remember we'd been in the Everest region for, I think it was day 3. And we'd been to Namche Bazaar, and you go round a corner as you go to the Everest View Hotel, and it's the first proper view you get of Everest. And I've got the weirdest photo that nobody else understands, but properly gives me goosebumps. And I have a photo of the back of my son's head taking a picture. And that was him taking his own photo of Everest. So he'd gone from little 7-year-old who I'm carrying through Queen's Medical Centre doors to actually he did 12 and a bit days trekking through Nepal at the age of 13. Also, I could break the promise and not get him his own photo and let him take it himself.
It's a really heartwarming moment, and it's a full circle moment of making that promise to allow him to feel it himself.
Yeah.
Such an incredible thing to do. It's a testament to not only obviously what you've been through and what you've done, but your son's resilience as well, to having to learn to walk again, and to then, what was it, 13 days trekking?
I think we ended up, it's about 11 and off, the very long days. But yeah, watching him, It's like the old saying, I saw such a change in him whilst he was there. He astounded me. So there were three of us in our party, and then my dad invited one of his workmates. So there were four of us, but I think there were 12 or 14 in our group. So there were loads of strangers with us. And then you obviously have the Sherpas and the guides. And that really worried me because I'm like, how am I going to survive with like strangers in the middle of nowhere? But there was such a diverse group of people. We had archaeologists, we had dentists from Chicago or somewhere in America, and nurses from just down the road, weirdly enough, that I'd never met. And sharing that with them was amazing because I think I even say it in the book. It was one of those places that I spent the first 2 days thinking, what mask do I need to put on to survive here? And trust me, 3 days into a trek where there are no cars, there is no transport, there's yaks, there's feet, and there's the occasional helicopter or aeroplane flying over you, but that's it. I was too tired to put a mask on, and that group got to know me, and my lad got to know me, along with my dad as well, far more than they've ever been able to, because I was too tired to put the mask on, if I'm totally honest. I couldn't fathom the energy for it, but it was the single most amazing experience ever. And to share that with both my dad and my son was like, it doesn't get much better than that unless I go to the top, which I need £1 million for, because my wife says if I make $1 million in profit, I can go to the top, because when I die going up, she has enough to survive after.
Is that another promise then you're going to fulfill?
Probably not. Now I'm in my 40s, I'm probably too old for it. It's something I'd love to do, but like I say, I need a lot of money for it.
Yeah, but even just having that moment with not only your son, and so he can see who you are. Did your dad see a different side of you as well then that he'd maybe not seen before?
He did, and I remember one conversation that we had, because my dad has this habit when we go walking, he still does it now, where he walks at his pace like half a mile in front of you. And we're like, I'm fast, but I like to, on that trip, I like to enjoy the view a little bit. He was like stomping away and he was really enjoying it. And then he came back, and I remember one day he said something very similar to, because I just started doing all the talks and I was dead open with the people there about the autism and all those sorts of things. And he looked at me, and we were between Dingboche and the Everest memorials, where all the remembrance are for the people who've died on the mountain. And he walked up to me and said something along the lines of, I don't like what you do. It makes me uncomfortable, and it makes me feel really weird that you're dead open about it. And it's not a bad thing, but it's weird. I understand because I feel very similar. And then that was it. That's all we talked about it. And I was like, for me, that was a huge moment, because now, fast forward, we talk about it quite openly. My dad is very similar to me, relates a lot to the neurodivergent traits that I've got, and has even explored the idea of whether or not he needs to look at a diagnosis and things. But when I factor that into the generation he grew up from, that in itself made the talks that I do even more worthwhile, because for my dad to say that was kind of like, that was a curveball, but it was really good. And I think he then saw the reason I have the passion for it. And I was terrified for a while. I gave him a copy of NeuroEdge, and it was one of those that because there's things in there that I didn't know if he would try and blame himself for things. But when I disclosed to my parents around autism and ADHD, my mum's first question was, what did I do wrong? And it's like, well, you did nothing wrong. You did nothing wrong as parents. We didn't know. The world didn't understand. So it's not about asserting blame for a parenting style or anything like that. And that was a really hard thing to kind of work through with them, because they come from a generation of blame and of guilt. And still now, when they come round, when the conversation steers towards neurodivergence, my mum still gets upset by it. But it's not about her guilt or feeling bad or anything now. It's like, she's asked me, did I miss things? It's like, no, they were there. But the world wasn't then what it is now. So what did you encourage me to do growing up? Well, you could create all you wanted. You used to do all these things and make up stories. And it's like, and there's your answer. You enabled me to be me anyway. So even without all that guidance and all people like me writing books about it and you doing the podcast and helping spread that knowledge, they were already doing the right things. But as I say, it was that very first, oh, what did we do wrong? Did we do something wrong? Did we let you down? No, you didn't. You actually fostered an environment where I could sit in my room and not feel the pressure to have to go out and play with the other kids if I didn't want to. I could amuse myself. And that was the thing. So vicariously, they did the right things. I know they look back and there's other things that they wish they'd done. And there's probably things I wish they'd done. But you can't change the past. What they are now is engaged with the future of learning more and being better.
Listening to you speak about giving a copy of your book to them for the first time, yeah, it really resonates with my own experiences. And speaking of that generational difference of awareness of obviously ADHD and autism, my dad he sounds like of a similar ilk to yours, where maybe a man of few words, and you don't really talk about too much of the deep stuff. It's, generally with my dad, it's the football scores on a Saturday is the most conversations we'll really have. But I didn't tell my dad, well, I didn't really speak to my dad about knowing that I had ADHD, and even then never mentioned it. And I don't know if it was a part of not feeling like he'd understand. When I started this podcast, I never disclosed what I was doing, what I was talking about, or anything like that. And I might have shared one or two things on Facebook, and my dad had seen something because he texted me and he said, "What's this ADHD stuff about?" And I'm like, "Oh God, what do I say?" And then it was just, there was a moment where he just texted me saying, "Proud of you, son," and it was, it really, really,
They're the moments.
it certainly is, because again, it's something that we've not really talked about. So having that moment of I was just completely shocked about. But it just, I think it shows just how important actually disclosing it can be, and talking about it, especially with your loved ones as well, how much of an impact it can actually have. As much as we worry about how it will be received, I think honesty sometimes is the best policy.
Massively.
As difficult as it is, sometimes swallowing that pill that is difficult. And I think that kind of relates to Pillar 6, the final pillar in NeuroEdge, about championing change. And I think you talk about the power of owning your own story, which comes from all the different steps that you've and the different pillars that have led up to that point, about self-acceptance, unmasking, and the other parts. Just knowing more about you then enables you to be the main character in your own story. Speaking about earlier, saying how often we probably people please and things like that, it can lead us to be a side character in our own stories.
Yes.
Kind of going through those pillars and those exercises that you set out in NeuroEdge be a massive. It can create the foundation to somebody then to go on and create real change in their own life, let alone their own, for other people, but just in their own life, and start being their authentic self. I know there's steps in there about how people can be more authentic, but that can lead to so much change. And one thing that really stuck out for me, which is something that I guess the reason why I started this podcast as well, you say you don't have to do this alone. And it's something that when you either are first diagnosed or realise you are neurodiverse, can feel a very lonely place. And you don't know, maybe you don't know anyone else that's got the conditions, or you don't know where to turn, because even through diagnosis, it's just looked through a medical lens, and it's, you've got this condition, and and we can tell because you've got these behaviours. Okay, well that's great, but what do I do with those behaviours, and where do I go from here? Nobody really tells you that.
No, that is kind of you get your label and off you go into the wide world, and that's why I wanted to write this, because for me, like you say, having been given the label, you're given a really long document about you, which is really revealing anyway after you've been through all that diagnostic process. And it was like, the idea of championing change as that final pillar is exactly what you've said. I am lucky in the fact that I can tell stories well. I can command a room, I can relate with people. And that's my storytelling platform. That's my platform for change. But change starts with us, with those conversations that we've just talked about with parents, with family, with friends, with associates. That's the championing change thing. You don't have to stand on a stage. You don't have to do podcasts. You don't have to go on social media and bare your soul. That's how we choose to do it. There is never any pressure. And that's what I say with the book is there's never any pressure. All you've got to do is champion the change that's right for you. So if that is going back to what I talked about with turning up at a function and my team standing on the other side of the room until they knew I was ready to interact, that's the change. They're the micro changes that make such a difference. And it did. I had to tell them afterwards how grateful I was for that. And they were like, well, we just knew that you'd like it. Like, but you don't realise how validated that made me feel and how important that was. All the way through to, I smile about it now, my very first talk I ever gave was for Derbyshire Constabulary. And I was invited as a guest speaker, and I was the second to last of the day. So everybody's already yawning. I'm already panicking that no one's listening to me. And after I'd given it, a professional guest speaker came up and they did theirs. That was amazing. But people came up to me and said to me, oh, I don't know, you're so brave sharing your story. I would never be able to do that, but I've loved it. And I did a couple more at different venues in the East Midlands. And it was this year, so I opened with one of my colleagues from Derbyshire. We opened the National Neurodiversity Celebration Week event from New Scotland Yard. So live streamed across the country. And then we were invited to another event at the end of the week. And I sat there and they said, we've not got you a speaking part, but there's a gap that if there is, we'll just get you up to ad hoc do a talk if you want. I'm like, yeah, whatever, just use and abuse me as you see fit. And they said, yeah, we're going to do a panel beforehand. Do you want to sit on the panel? I'm like, who's on it? And they introduced me to that panel, and 4 out of the 6 people were the people that had come to me after my very first talk and said I could never do what you do. And I was like, I ain't going on the panel. I'll cheer from the audience and I'll get people clapping because this is their moment now. They don't need me who can confidently do that. They can sit there and own that. They've got their own stage. And as weird as this will probably sound, I was so proud of every one of them because they sat there and they shared their story, all having said to me 3 years before they could never do it. And I'm like, wow, I'm not claiming it, but I was part of that. If I hadn't done that talk, maybe they wouldn't be sat there now. And I was like, and that settled in me that I want to take NeuroEdge bigger than what it is. It's obviously a book. I'm only advertising in the UK at the minute. But I want it to become more than that. And I aim to make it into something even longer lasting. I want to take this to companies and say, I am a neurodivergent leader with now 20 years of critical leadership experience. And I've only got there to the level I'm at, actually, since I took my mask off, since I allowed myself to be myself. Since 2019, I've been promoted twice, and I've got the job that I do now. There is only one in my entire organisation, and that's me. It's like, this is what a neurodivergent brain can do. But for so long, I couldn't do it because I was spending more energy pretending to fit in. And now that I'm not, I'm embraced for who and what I am most of the time. And I'm like, I want to take that out there and show we have so much to offer. And that's where my championing change comes from, because I'm one of the lucky people with a big platform and a loud mouth.
But it's good that you're within yourself, you are being a champion for everyone else that's neurodiverse. And, you know, a lot of questions, you can ask yourself a lot of questions to find when you realise you've got ADHD, autism, or, you know, or being diagnosed. And I think one of those questions for a lot of people that I know that I've spoken to has been whether they can still achieve everything they want to. And by the sounds of it, since you've found self-acceptance, since you've learned to take away those masks one by one, that you've still managed to build that career that you envisioned when you joined the force all those years ago.
I've achieved more. I think I've genuinely achieved more, because I remember going for promotion processes when I was still conforming, when I was still in that, oh, I can't be me phase. And I never got anywhere. I have had some really interesting jobs within my organisation. But since removing the mask, I've released The Raven, the one story that I was never going to release. I've been hosted on podcasts. I have talked to every police force in the country via a live stream. I've been invited to London to a film premiere to meet directors so that I can make a film with them. All because the energy that I was expending on fitting in, conforming, performing can now be redirected to where it belongs. So it's kind of, I suppose it's reclaiming all that energy that, like we said earlier, people pleases everyone else. But what do we get out of it? Well, we get the tiredness, the burnout, the stress, the strain, the sleepiness. Well, if we're not wasting that energy that way, what can we put it into? Look at the passion that you've brought now a podcast to life. All those sorts of things happen because we reclaim it. We reclaim that narrative. And I think if you look at my LinkedIn, it's really funny. In the last probably 2 years, I've seen a shift in myself. So everything beforehand was exactly as LinkedIn is. My job, what I've done, what I've achieved in my job, maybe an article when I was interviewed for Federation magazine, those sorts of things. But if you go on it now, you actually see me. And my job doesn't appear much. I'm very proud of what I've got as a job, and I'm very proud of the things I've achieved, but that is my job. My passion, my purpose, my person is changing lives, sharing a story to inspire others. And that's all it is now. And I don't know if you've ever listened to podcasts and TED Talks by Simon Sinek, Finding Your Why. It's really interesting because I remember reading that. I read it just when I had made my first disclosure. And I'll freely admit, I read it and went, don't get it. Can't do it. Sat down, tried to find a why. And I was like, nah, I am my job. That was it. And I closed it. I closed the book. I closed his book and I never touched it. And then I listened to it again, probably about start of this year, actually. I listened to it again. And as we got to the bit, it's like, can you identify your why? Within 30 seconds, it's like, yeah, I want to be out there to impact other people, change lives and inspire change. I'm like, oh, where did that come from? Did I find that in my back pocket? But that tells me how much I've grown and how much I've changed. And like I say, you look at my LinkedIn and it's all about me sharing stuff. It's about the book. It's about leadership. It's about inspiration for others. It's not about a living resume or anything daft like that. And I've made so many more connections. You think how I ended up appearing in your inbox.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's amazing that, because like you say, with LinkedIn, there is all that stuff. And it's funny because there's people that I speak to in my line of work that are either business owners or high up in in businesses, and they will say that LinkedIn's it's all just like wish-washy. Everybody posting their best lives, their best versions, and making out everyone like they're succeeding and they're winning at life, and it's it almost feels like a secret between everyone, like a known secret that we all know that's not really how it is, but we decide to post it anyway. But there is a few people that stick out, like yourself, that will post authentically, and it's something that I've tried to do myself recently as well with the podcast, because it's very much, especially with LinkedIn, it's seen as one of those platforms that's like you had before with just your employment stuff and the things you do for work. And yeah, similarly with mine was very much like that 2 years ago, and now it's with this podcast, Finding My Why. I listened to Simon's book as well on that. I think I found him through Diary CEO and those kind of episodes, and at that point, when I first listened to that, and I was like, well, how do I find my why? What is my why? How am I ever going to find it? Because there's so many different things that I'm kind of maybe interested in, or hobbies that I picked up and put down and stuff.
Yeah.
What I'm really passionate about, and it's weird how sometimes it just comes to you and you find, like for you, your moment with The Rock and being inspired by that. For me, it was sitting in my own space for a little bit, which I don't really do. So it's really interesting to how you find UI. It's not a simple thing that I think
No.
people sometimes think that people just know what they want to do. So it's really, really interesting. And you've got some really good, obviously, tips in NeuroEdge as well about how people can find their way of curiosity, of creativity, and utilize it, and how they can, around hyperfocus as well, and finding something that you're passionate about doing, and you've clearly found that with what you're doing. I did have one question as well, actually. Speaking about the 4 people that you spoke to 3 years ago that said they could never do what you're doing, did you get the chance to speak to them afterwards, after they'd been on the panel?
I still talk to all of them, actually. But yes, I've spoken to them since, and each of them said that they were inspired by the fact that I was, in their words, brave enough to do it. And I was like, yeah, but you clearly were at that point. And I've seen them grow. And it's, like I say, I don't claim it. I just know that I was a tiny part of that. And that makes me so proud. It does. And I see it with my own kids as well, because my oldest doesn't want to explore the neurodivergent angle, and that's fine. Whereas my daughter is like, yep, I'm ready for mine. We can go for the diagnosis process now if you want. Yep, let's go for it. And my middle lad, he has always been unique in his presentation, and he just owns it. And I'm like, yeah, I helped that. He's taken it to the next level, but I helped. And that's the same with those that were on the talks. It was like, I actually had a lump in my throat as I sat there watching them all, thinking, yeah, I remember the nerves of sitting on that stage for the first time. I remember thinking, no one wants to listen, no one wants to hear this. But then seeing an engaged audience that was with them, it's like, yeah, I now know that in 2 or 3 years' time, they will sit in the same position I was with someone else that they've inspired. And it's the snowball that you throw up the hill. I just seem to throw more and more and more in the hope that I cause an avalanche.
We've clearly been inspirational to those 4 people on the panel, whether the sole reason why they went and did that themselves, or even a little part. I think it just highlights the impact that you're making now, that you're being your authentic self and putting yourself out there, and with your children as well. Certainly sound like an inspirational figure in their lives. You're certainly leading by example by showing that you can be your authentic self, and you can still, succeed. And there's nothing wrong with that, because it can feel a bit, certainly when you go through teenage years, it can feel a little bit wrong. Like your daughter going through the goth phase, I went through an emo phase, and that didn't feel, I didn't fit in, and I felt a bit, but it's not about, life isn't about fitting in. It's about being yourself and creating your own story, which is what you've done with the Raven series, with what you've done with NeuroEdge as well. So please keep on producing inspiring material by all means. And with NeuroEdge, it's the ultimate guide to embracing your unique mind, as you phrase it on the book. Where can people find that, and so they can start their journey?
So it's on Amazon for those who like my voice. It's also on Audible. I recorded it myself, which is the first time I've done that. I usually pay a narrator to do it, but I thought it's my personal story, so I need to tell it, and I need to tell it well. So it's available on Amazon in paperback, Kindle, and like I say, an audiobook. You can go to my website, which is Tobey, Tobey, and there's not only links to the books, but there's also, you can find out more about me if you're that interested. But there's lots of little tips and bits on there that go beyond the book. So the little activities that are in there are the ones that I decided to put in the book. What I tend to do on social media is I'll share other bits. So worksheets that people can print off. I do posters for organisations that they can just print off and put up, that just kind of help not only us as neurodivergent individuals, but line managers and organisations to foster open cultures and things like that. But yeah, under the writing name Tobey Alexander, that's me. And it's spelt weird because it was after Tobey Maguire from Spider-Man.
Love that. I love that. I'm a Marvel nerd, so yeah.
Yeah, the true Spider-Man.
Is he, I think personally my favourite's Andrew Garfield. But
no,
controversial, I know.
Tobey Maguire through and through. Through and through. Andrew Garfield was good. Tobey Maguire, yeah.
Fair enough. Brilliant. Well, thanks for sharing your insights and your experiences.
Thank you
Gav,
for having me.
I really appreciate it. I know, obviously, a very emotive topics we've talked about for you today. But I thank you for your openness and
Thank you.
honesty and spilling it all today, speaking about it. And I think a lot of people will take something away from this and hopefully buy copies of NeuroEdge for sure.
Hopefully.
But certainly it is a great tool for starting that path to self-acceptance and learning to be yourself.
And we're not alone. That's the one message is, if that just sits there on your shelf and you pull it out when you need it and you put it back when you don't, that's what it's there for. Just to make sure that you know that those steps may not have been trodden exactly by me, by anyone else, but similar steps by similar people in similar experiences kind of makes you realise we're not on that journey alone.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks a lot, Gav. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.